Yeah, okay, time to live free. Plenty goals I'm achieving. Some real life topics and talking financial freedom. Mindset, soul and love, everything in between. This is Freedom Podcast. Tune in, live free. Hey, got my mindset right and I got the drive. Planning one day, no more job, no more 9 to 5. Love, money, mine. Love, money, mine. This is freedom. Tune in, cause it's going down. Woo!
Hi, it's Anna Davidson from Your Freedom Podcast. And in this episode, I interview G-Sabini Roberts. G is a queer, non-binary, autistic branding specialist with over 2 decades in the design industry, and having run their own business, Branding by G, for 9 years. They work collaboratively with business owners to create show-stopping brands that people genuinely connect with. They also run the Queer Box, delivering LGBTQ plus diversity training to small businesses. And it was an absolute pleasure to have G join us on the show and share everything that she wants to get out into the world. So loving this episode. Fab. So hi G.
Hello.
I'm really excited for this interview because I know we only recently connected on social media, on Facebook.
Yeah.
And I think you've got some really good, interesting businesses going with the Queer Box and also Branding by G. That our audience will be great to listen to. And also you've got a really interesting story. So I'm really curious how you got to what you're doing these days. You know, you're helping people build their brands.
Mm-hmm.
And also you're doing the stuff with the Queer Box, but how did you kind of like start this whole branding stuff that you're doing today?
Oh, it ultimately happened by accident. I'm one of these strange people that is still doing the thing that I went to college to do. And I only did it at the time because I hadn't decided what I wanted to be when I grew up. But I was vaguely competent at art, and I could probably earn enough of a living as a graphic designer to see me through until I figured out what I wanted to do next. So that's where it started. But then I went to university and did a design degree. And as part of that degree, there were modules on branding. And it turns out I just love it. It's about the puzzle of it. If you're creating a visual brand for somebody, you've got to find a way to distill all of the key parts of who they are as a business, what they represent, what they mean, how they emotionally connect to the people they emotionally connect to. And you've got to find a visual language for that.
Yeah,
I love that. It's like a puzzle. It's like you've got to dig around and find all the bits and pieces and pull them together and then create the visuals for it. And that's where I get my kicks, really. I just loved it then, and I still love it now. So it was an accident. I didn't intend to do it, but once I found it, it's kind of always been there.
Well, I suppose the graphic stuff, if you did that, if you were doing that when you were younger, it kind of fits quite well, doesn't it? Or graphic design fits quite well with kind of going into branding.
That's how it started. So
I
started as a graphic designer in the industry, and then I worked my way up. I ended up teaching it to undergraduates for a few years. I loved branding, but I wasn't always doing it. And then when I had kids, I took some time out, and when I wanted to go back to work, starting a business seemed like the most sensible thing to do because I could fit it around having small children. So I started off as a part-time thing, and it literally was a Facebook post saying, I'll design you a logo for 50 quid. Give me something that occupies my brain that isn't nappies and breastfeeding and all of that kind of stuff. And then it took off. Within 9 months, I was having to put the kids into childcare part-time so that I could actually meet the demand. And that was 9 years ago. So it grew.
Wow. Yeah. So were you originally doing a lot of stuff more face-to-face offline than you are now?
Absolutely. My first 5 years or so were predominantly local networking groups. I was doing a lot of local businesses. The big shift for me happened about 3 years ago when I started to properly take it online. There was a point that changed things as well, quite early on, within the first couple of years of being in business, where I was trying to design a logo for a local company and it just wasn't working. They weren't liking what I was doing and they weren't able to communicate why, and we were all getting frustrated. And anybody who's ever actually worked with a graphic designer will know that traditional design process of going backwards and forwards and making all those tweaks can suck the soul out of you. It really can. And this particular case wasn't working. So because they were down the road, I just said, hey, should we meet up in person? And clearly we're not managing to communicate by email what's going on here. We did. We sat down at their dining table, and in less than an hour, we had created this incredible visual brand that none of us would have ever thought of if we hadn't been in the same room bouncing ideas off each other. So that's when I started doing the branding collaboratively, working with the owner of the business or whoever it is that is the person that needs the brand. I work with them and we actually create it together. Now we do it all online. But that process seems to be the thing that's ultimately enabled my business to really grow, because that is unique. There aren't other people doing that.
Yeah.
It's great fun for me because I get to hang out with people and do interesting things with people, but it's great for them as well because they are part of the design process. They are in it. If you own your brand, if you're the face of your brand, it's your business, your everything, then for you to actually be a part of that process that gives it the visual language it needs to communicate with the world, then you own it. It's brilliant. And it's a whole lot.
And also from my perspective, just, selling physical products and doing private labeling, a lot of people that maybe I teach think that you just basically getting a logo and slapping it on the product. And I've always explained that actually you've got to really work out what this brand that you're creating, what is it about, what does it stand for, who, what does it represent? And even though I'm not really a branding expert, but I think it's important for people to realize that branding isn't just creating a pretty website or creating a logo, is it?
No, not at all. Yeah, the way I
You'll have a much better way of presenting it than I do, but it's kind of you, isn't it? It's what you're trying, whether it's a physical product, it's what you're trying to deliver to the customers and represent that. Like, look at Apple, look at the bigger brands and Nike and all that.
Totally. You've hit the nail on the head. The way I describe it is your brand is the way you make people feel. And if you think of the brands that you love, whether they be Apple or the little boutique down the road or wherever, whatever the brand is, the ones that you love, you genuinely love, you get excited when you get to buy one of their products, you're interested in them, you follow them, you share them with your friends. And that emotional connection is what we're really talking about here. Yes, anybody could go to Fiverr and get a pretty logo. And if you're just starting out, to be honest, that's all you need at the beginning. But once you actually get yourself established, you have a customer base, you have an audience, and they are emotionally connected to who you are as a brand and what you mean to them. And that's where it gets really interesting. And that's when it becomes really important to make sure that whatever your visuals are, they communicate that emotional connection.
Yeah. So let's come on to the queer box then, because that's an interesting one. And then I'm sure you've got a really good story to kind of share with people around that. And also recently, I think we're both posted on Facebook around this whole pronoun thing. And I know that you've had a few, I suppose, challenges with that, with getting, I think I read something around your application for a new house.
Yes.
And so, I think let's touch on what you're trying to do with the whole queer box stuff.
Sure. The basic background behind all of this is I'm queer and I'm non-binary and I am entirely out. I never have not been. So I have lived this now for decades. This is my reality. And on the one hand, the last 20 to 30 years have been brilliant socially for anyone in the LGBTQ community because things have moved on. When I first came out, I was never going to marry my partner. I was never going to be able to legally have children with them. I faced discrimination on a daily basis just walking down the street. Those things are different now. So we have moved on and it's been a joy to be a part of that evolution. But so that's the basic context. I'm out and always have been. And since being much more visible online in the last few years, that is something I'm known for. I talk about LGBTQ stuff. And then back in August, 5 or 6 months ago now, I was out doing a writing retreat and I checked on my phone, and in the time I'd been off my phone, I'd had 3 invitations to women's Facebook groups. And I would get these a lot. At the time, the public name I was using was the name I no longer use, which is Gina. That was my given name, and I've always just been under that. Never felt strongly with it, but it's a feminine sounding name.
Yeah.
And what I was finding is people would take one look at that and say, yeah, I'm inviting you to my women's groups. And I had a bit of a rant to say, look, if you actually read my content, if you actually look at my profile, it's clear I'm non-binary. The fact that you've made an assumption based on the name I have there is on you. But please stop doing this. And it went mad. Everybody was suddenly all over this. I ended up being interviewed on the BBC. I was in national press. It was just a big deal because I'd said, listen, for non-binary people, this is not okay. And what came out of that was a lot of connection requests from people saying, I didn't realize. I never meant to upset somebody. I never meant to use my terminology incorrectly or be inadvertently offensive, but clearly I am being. I don't know enough. I want to make everyone feel comfortable. I want to be inclusive, but I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah.
And I wasn't expecting that. So I then got together with my two partners, my wife and our other partner, Robin, and we have set up the Queer Box with the simple aim of providing that basic education about what LGBTQ plus stuff is, what they all mean, what the key words are, what the definitions of those words are, what it's appropriate to ask, what it's really not appropriate to ask. But while we're here, let's tell you a bit about the backstory. So next time you meet a trans person, you're not inclined to ask them those awkward questions.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's.
I think that's really good. I think that's really good because I think even I've sometimes felt like that. So I think people sometimes don't do nothing because they don't know what they don't want to offend. And I'm sure everyone listening can relate to that in some respects. And I've had it with having mixed race children with people, or saying, well, I've got friends that are black or just like, and you just like cringe when they say it. And a lot of the time it's like, they don't mean to come across in the way that they are. And it is about I think it's really about education. My son had something at school recently. And immediately I thought that child just needs educating. It wasn't, I wasn't like in anger or, because they're only 10 at the end of the day. So I think that's fab what you're doing, because I'd seen something recently around, is it ready? You're going to be launching this like education box or training soon, aren't you?
Ready now. We are literally building it out. It's going live on Monday. So we've created a course specifically for small business owners. There are education programs for the corporate world already. But there doesn't seem to be much on offer for that individual person who's running their own business. How do you access that information? Because there are lots of things that you can do within your business that simply demonstrate that you are inclusive. It's painfully easy to accidentally exclude people if you're not slightly conscious of the language that you're using and the way that you're talking about the things that you do. Again, it's this whole, you don't know what you don't know until you know it. So we've created this course. It's a really simple, you can do it in an hour online. Here's all the basic information. Here's all the terminology. Here's what you need to know to make sure that next time you encounter an LGBTQ person in your business, you can make sure that they feel included and welcome. That's the whole point of it. And it's fairly simple when you get into it. It's just filling in those blanks. I do genuinely believe the vast majority of people are not remotely bigoted, and everybody wants to do the right thing and wants to be kind and inclusive and nice and let everybody feel good. 99% of people all fall into that category.
Exactly.
This is for those people who don't have the fortunate history like we do of having been part of that community. You just don't know. So this is what we've done. We've created.
So if people want to get more information about that, how do they? I know obviously they could follow you. We'll put some of the links you see in this recording, so we can direct people to that. But if people listening, they can just connect with you on Facebook, can't they? Or
Totally. And the Queer Box has a website. It's thequeerbox.co.uk, and there's information on there. There's a free resource on there. There's also obviously the course that you can do, and we're around. The whole purpose of all of this is that we just want to support the people who want to support us.
Yeah.
They don't know how to.
Yeah, exactly. Cool, brilliant. So on this podcast, we focus on 3 pillars: freedom in love, freedom in money, and freedom in mind. I've nearly forgotten then. And I know that we were talking before we went live about different challenges and adversities, and I know you sharing about autism. So as regards to kind of like maybe challenges or adversities and things, how have you coped with stuff like that along the way? Because you were saying before about how things have changed, haven't they, as regards to coming out and being gay, and people's behaviours have changed towards it, and I've seen that as well. I think on lots of different topics as well. I think the world's becoming a bit more friendly to things, which is nice to see, I think. But yeah, just share how you, because I think the whole reason me putting this podcast together was when I was in my darkest times, it would have been great to listen to how people got through shit, basically, in their lives. So if you could share how you've done that, or, you know, some of the stuff you were saying before about autism.
Absolutely. Well, I am autistic, but I'm one of the late realization people. So I didn't realize I was until my own child was going through the diagnostic process, and there were just too many pennies dropping for me not to go, hang on a second, this is me as well. So I was in my mid-30s before I actually realized that I'm autistic too, and it explains a lot of things that happened when I was younger, challenges I had forming social relationships and friendships, and I was very isolated for a good while as a youngster until I figured out how to do social interaction well enough to make things work. And it has affected the way I function in other ways too. So one of the things that I don't seem to have is any real awareness, or certainly fear, of the way other people may judge me. And I'm aware that for a lot of people, when faced with the idea of doing a thing, one of the biggest hurdles they have to overcome is the fear of what other people might think of them for doing that thing. I don't seem to have that. I have plenty of other fears, but the one thing that I don't experience is the moment of trying to guess how other people might judge me. I don't do that. It just simply is not on my radar. So that, in a way, has made it's great. It certainly means that I find it much easier to crack on and do stuff than a lot of people do, because I'm not afraid in the same way a lot of people are. It does mean I get burned. Often I end up doing things that are like complete little failures because I haven't thought about all of the other things, but it doesn't stop me. I still do the things. So
does that make you, though, just thinking about it, does that make you understand how other people, does that make you think, God, why do you not do that then? Like, you don't get why people feel like that.
Well, I do get it in a way, because I'm surrounded by people who do feel that way. And so it's part of the narrative that we live in, that there is a fear around doing something new because other people will judge you and may comment on it and say negative things about it. That exists. I'm aware that exists. And it does exist in some ways for me. One of the things that you talked about is my conversations recently online about titles and how people judge me. So the story that you mentioned before is my wife and I, between us, we have 4 children, and we spotted a house going up for rent in the village that the kids are at school, and at the moment we have to drive 15 minutes to get them there. So it would be ideal. We love this house. And we applied and we didn't get it, which is fair enough. It was a lovely house, and there were probably about 4 or 5 applicants, as far as we're aware, that also applied on the same day we did, because everybody wanted it. No issue at all. However, it did trigger us a little bit, because a year ago we did the same thing. But a year ago, we were the only people that applied for that particular house for several weeks. And we were ignored and blanked. And eventually we started chasing them. And it turned out, although it was never explicitly said, because that particular house was owned by the local church community, they did not want us to rent it because we were a same-sex couple. Homophobia bit us on the arse a year ago when it came to a house. So this particular time, it just flared up again for us, because obviously you look at an application form, and because you can look at our titles, people make gender assumptions based on those titles. And so I have been considering what title I want to use because as much as I would love to fight the good fight and say MUX, which is the title that I currently
That's
have.
new to me. That's new to
Yeah.
me. That came out when I did my post. I'd not come across it, and then I've noticed it. How do you feel about that?
Personally, I don't particularly like it. It's if you change your name by default, as anybody who wants to change their name for gender-based reasons will have to do. The options available to you for a title, the only one that doesn't confer something else like Doctor, Reverend, Sergeant, is MUX. It's the only gender neutral title you have. You've got Mr., you've got Mrs., Miss, and Ms., and then you've got this MX, which is pronounced MUX or mix, depending on how you want to say it. But very few people have heard about it. Not a lot of people know what it is. And certainly, if I'm trying to fill in a form online because I'm trying to buy some shampoo, as happened last week, or I'm applying for a house, or when I was actually in hospital with the NHS, just trying to change my name on their system, the box isn't available.
It's not there. Yeah, I was thinking that.
On the NHS, I could have been a brigadier. I could have been one of many, many titles, but MIX was not there. So part of me feels
I'm not surprised at the NHS, really. But it's such a big organisation, isn't it? You'd think that.
Absolutely, but there are so many non-binary. The world has moved on. People are coming out as non-binary. The community is growing all the time because all of these people who historically would have just hidden it and cracked on and done the best to function in whatever gender they were trying to pretend that they were existing as are now able to come out, and we have got protections. Partially, we're still working on some of them, but the community is growing, awareness is growing. But at the moment, that title, which is kind of the default option for a non-binary or a non-gender specific person, of course, it can be used by anyone. Yeah. Anybody could use the title MUX. Everyone's entitled to. If you prefer not to give away your gender, you can use it, except you can't because it's not available in the majority of the places where you would need to use it. And that's the problem, because when I put that title down, people then look at it and go, oh, that's a bit weird, which we don't know if this is what happened with the house application, but historically, we don't trust that it didn't.
Yeah.
So we're then in that situation of, do I fight the good fight of continuing to be a MUX and raising a fuss every single time it's not available? Or do I decide, actually, I'm running 2 businesses, I've got 4 kids, I've got enough on my plate, and I'd like to just crack on with life and not be discriminated against inadvertently by people who've never heard of my title, and choose something else. So I haven't made a decision on that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you'd made a decision, because I think it's going to be it is a difficult one, isn't it? Because I could see people saying about doctor when you were thinking about putting doctor or reverend, and it people's opinion. It was funny, different people's opinions, I think, on it. And of course, you're not going to feel comfortable with either because you don't really want to do those.
Yes.
It's like, because I could see people saying, well, it tended to be the people that had got a PhD or were a medical doctor. I think
actually that's not true.
Oh, was it not? Okay.
Not true. If I looked at, so just to give the background, the title doctor is not a legally protected title. Anyone what I mean right now decide to use the title doctor, and you're legally allowed to do it. So let's just get that out the way. It is not a protected status. It's illegal to pretend that you are a medical doctor, but to just use the title doctor, it's fair play. Legally, go for it. Anyone who fancies it. So if that's you, go for it. It's yours. So there isn't a legal position on this one other than do what the hell you want. It's fine. But I was interested in feedback on it, and I found that most people, probably 60% of people, this is where it's interesting because I'm interested in other people's feedback on this, even though ultimately I will be making my own choice. So I am emotionally triggered by some of the reactions. I found reading some of the feedback from people hard. So it is interesting that when I'm actually faced with it, I do have that same emotional response. But the people who said, no, you shouldn't use doctor because it's disrespectful to the people who have earned that title legitimately, none of those people were actually doctors.
Oh, I was thinking they were.
A lot of them were in the circles of doctors. So they are people who are
Right.
academics who have not yet done any kind of PhD, or they're people who've got lots of doctors in their family, or whatever. People who are surrounded by doctors but not doctors themselves. The handful of people who are doctors who replied to that post said, I don't care. I've done the work. I'm a little
Right,
bit,
okay.
I don't care because
Good.
it's not actually relevant. Your lived experience is nothing to do with me. You need to do what you want to do. And it's not about trying to claim to be something. And I realized ultimately that the concern was about deceit.
Yeah.
Actually pretending that you have a doctorate or making a pretense about it, that's where the problem lies. If I were to say tomorrow, walk out and use the title doctor, and someone says, oh, what are you a doctor in? I can say, actually, I just choose to use the title because I legally can, and I get discriminated against if I don't.
Yeah, exactly.
Rather than I've got a doctorate in
making something up.
I couldn't lie, I wouldn't. So the deceit seems to be the issue. Is on the one hand, we know, and a lot of the people who are doctors are saying it makes a massive difference. Using that title, I get preferential treatment all of the time. Actually, anyone could choose to use that title and get access to that preferential treatment. I don't think that's a judgment on them. I think that's a judgment on the society we live in that proffers preferential treatment on people based on the letters at the front of their name.
I know. It's a really interesting one. Yeah, I think it's a real interesting one, like actually moving forward if you actually tested this. Because I think we kind of know what the outcome would be, but it'd be good to see if it actually did, was that outcome.
Yeah. I think that's where the interest is for me, is even recognizing that ultimately it was some of my closer friends who said, I would really feel uncomfortable with you using the term doctor. I don't think anybody at that point realized, and I did a second post to discuss this, I don't think anyone realized that actually by saying, no, don't use doctor because you're pretending to be something you're not, was actually saying, no, don't use that. Stay with a title that ultimately puts you at risk on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Exactly. There is no easy answer here. Either I use a title like doctor or reverend or any of the others that people might give me what they class as being undeserved preferential treatment, or I use a title that gives me equally undeserved risk.
Yeah.
That's the problem. It's actually not about who's using what title where. It's the fact we live in a society that will look at those two letters and make a judgment and change the way they treat that person. And that is not okay. It doesn't matter whether you're getting preferential treatment or whether you're experiencing prejudice as a result. Either way, I either use a title that means that I get access to society's crazy ideas about deservedness, or I use a title that ultimately results in me being treated unfairly. There isn't a middle ground. If there was a title I could choose right now that I could just not raise an eyebrow about and just be treated as an average human being that is gender neutral, I would be all over it. But that title doesn't exist.
And in years to come, probably MX or Mix, is it Mix, would be on there.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I know you don't feel that is a great title, or you might not feel 100% comfortable with that, but if it was regularly on all these different forms, and many people were ticking that box, it'd be different, I think.
Totally. And we can see this historically with the title Ms, that a couple of generations ago, no one had heard of, and increasingly people have used it. Women have used it because they want to use a title that doesn't give information away about their marital status. However, people still will sometimes perceive things in people using that title. Like, oh, you must be divorced, even though they're simply use it because they want to use it. They don't want people to know whether they're married or not, or have taken someone else's name or not, or, who cares?
I know. I had it when I split up from my marriage. I rented a house for a bit, and it was the single parent with two children that was knocking me back. I got knocked back from so many different applications. They wanted to take a couple family, you know, it's this whole thing again, isn't it? Perception. And I was like, I was always the breadwinner in my marriage. I was like, I'm fine out. Yeah, you can check out all my credit scores and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, it's this assumption. It was an assumption that I might not be able to pay the rent. I'm thinking, you know, and so, yeah. But eventually, it was like, who, you know, I got in touch with a letting agency that I knew them personally, and they helped me. But I literally got knocked back by about 4 or 5 people, and my weeks were going down. I was like, I had 4 weeks, 3 weeks, 2. I need to move out of this place quickly.
Oh, gosh, that's terrible.
So I can understand it from that level, even though it's not the same.
It is, in a way. It's ultimately people making judgments about you based on totally irrelevant stuff.
Exactly.
And that's what prejudice is. People making a judgment about somebody with no grounds to make that judgment.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't matter what it is. Yeah.
Well, it'd be interesting what you decide. I definitely think when I read that post, I was thinking, I don't know if I commented or not. I think it was when I was doing my stalking to find out more about you before the interview. But I was thinking, go for the doctor. Because probably from a selfish point of view, I was thinking, I want to see how this,
yeah,
you know, if you get that next house straight away, it just proves, doesn't it, how society judges.
It's certainly, if it is something I choose to do, I will most definitely be documenting the repercussions, because I think as a social experiment, that's just interesting.
Yeah.
I now have enough lived experience to say that using the title mix is a pain in the bum. People treat you differently. People can't fit you on their systems, and you end up having to make a fuss with them. And you know, you can't just fill in a form and walk away. You've got to fill in a form and have a conversation and say, oh, okay, well, if we don't have that, which one should we use instead? And well, there isn't one. There isn't one. Either I'm gendering myself or I'm using a title that I haven't legitimately earned. And so there is no other option. So where do you want to put me on that box? You're going to base it on the gender that I was assigned at birth, because that's not my gender. I do have one friend who is non-binary who says that they deliberately choose a random one every single form. So and I love that approach as well. So sometimes they're a sir, sometimes they're a miss, sometimes they're a reverend. They just literally go, I'm going to take the 6th one in this box and just go for that one. And I think that's also quite a fun approach.
Yeah. It is ridiculous, but like you say, things are changing and things probably will change in the future. It's just that you need it now. In regards to things like those, you know, like, well, I'm sure there's other things as well as, you know, getting a house and stuff like that, but it would be an interesting experiment, like you say. So yeah, I'll watch this space on it. It's frustrating, isn't it? How do you cope sort of like mentally and mindset wise, you know, for people who are listening to this who may be gay, who are maybe haven't come out yet, who are struggling with kind of telling people, or I don't know, just struggling with the world, maybe judging them? Because I know you were saying that you don't worry about, because of the autism, how people think, you know, how people judge you. For people who maybe haven't got that, who are worried about people judging them about maybe the workplace or whatever, any kind of advice or tips that you would give them?
I think this is where it's hard, and it's a point I was going to make as part of the last conversation as well, is we need to recognize the emotional energy that goes into coming out as different. Because not only are you having to overcome those inner demons of how are people going to react, but invariably there is an explanation. Invariably it invites question. People say, oh, so you're this, so what does that mean, and tell me about this, and they will potentially ask personal questions that they wouldn't ask anybody else. For me, going into that appointment at the hospital, I then had to have a 5 to 10 minute conversation with the receptionist, who was lovely, but then wanted to talk to me about the fact that they've done this LGBTQ training and it all came out on an email, and she's really sorry that the system hasn't caught up, which it was a perfectly fine conversation. But if I'm somebody that's emotionally struggling, I don't have the emotional energy to engage with other people's processing and other people's questioning. So this is the challenge, as much as being afraid that somebody might behave towards you in a prejudicial manner. That's one thing. But the other thing is, actually, it's going to be more work. If I'm struggling anyway, I'm opening the door to other people leaning on me harder. And that's tricky. If you look at how I'm non-binary, I use they, them pronouns, and I'm open about this. And quite often, people will get that wrong. They will refer to me with a different pronoun, or they'll use my old name. And generally speaking, people now are, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot, and we move on. And that's the way you always need to handle it. But it's not always that way. Sometimes people will go, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I really, you know that I don't actually feel that way. I totally understand. I totally respect everything. And then I end up having to comfort them.
Yeah.
But this is the thing, is that they've made a simple error, and it's fine, and we can all move on. But if they take it to the point where ultimately I then need to comfort them, then that again it's putting more emotional weight on my shoulders for simply just existing as who I am. And that we need to recognize, I think, that's a challenge. So not only do we have the fear of how people are going to react, but we also have the fact that it's going to cost us more to help change the world. So for those people, I would suggest find your people. There are plenty of places online where you can find other groups of people who are whatever you are, who are like you. And that is where the strength is. I've had times where something's happened, I've seen a post on social media or someone said something, and because I've been emotionally busy at that time, or I've been a bit low, I've then been able to say to those people, this thing's happened. And the people who have got the emotional energy that day can then go and comment on that post or can engage with that person. And between us, we kind of carry each other, which is brilliant. So that would be the first thing, is find your people and find your community. And as you feel strong enough, the more you tell people, the better it does get. I know I now have a reputation for being the queer, non-binary, autistic person who does branding. And the only thing that's relevant professionally really is the branding part. But people know me for the other things. I get tagged in stuff, people will ask me questions. And mostly because these days my life is fairly good, I've got the resilience and the emotional stores to be able to deal with that and help support people and educate people. And you know what's really lovely? It's the messages I get in my inbox every now and then from someone saying, I've come out, and I never would have had the strength to come out if I hadn't been watching your posts for the last couple of years.
Yeah, that was so nice. It is. It's really good. I can kind of relate to it a little bit just on the domestic abuse and domestic violence. I'm in a few groups where at one point I really needed the support, and now I go in and support other people.
Yep.
And sometimes I get messages where people said I've left him, or it's a similar thing, and it just feels like it's finding a meaning in your own suffering in some respects through going through.
Yeah, I guess so.
I know. But yeah, I can totally relate to that, and that's just really inspiring to hear it. So for people who are listening, who I think that's a great share, to go and find a group of support, really.
Yeah,
and I'm sure
100%.
there are lots on social media in all sorts of different places and groups and things like that.
There are loads.
Yeah.
This is one thing that we have. When I was growing up, I didn't have that. Back in the 90s, there was no internet forum for this stuff. So it was a matter of finding the nearest LGBT group, which was an hour away by bus, but I still went.
Yeah. Well, I know, God, things have changed, haven't they? Since we've had mobile phones, it's just it's just become a lot easier to find stuff and get stuff, isn't it? Or connect with people. Brilliant, inspiring stuff. So at the end of all my interviews, I always ask that one question around freedom, because it's called the Freedom Podcast. So what does freedom mean to you, G?
It's about love. It's living and loving authentically, whatever that means to you, to be able to love the people around you in the ways that are right for you. One of the things that we haven't talked about here is when I mentioned the queer box, and I started it with my two partners. They are my two romantic partners. I'm poly as well. So for me, love in my life is equally outside the box, outside the traditional idea of what that looks like. and being able to live my life that way and increasingly be public about it and just open. It's not about being public. It's not about shouting about the fact that, hey, look at what we're doing. It's about just not having to hide what is day-to-day normality, but is also beautiful day-to-day normality for me, is brilliant. And by doing that, the more all of us do it, we demonstrate to our children that they can also live authentically as themselves. They can love authentically as themselves.
Yeah.
And it's okay.
I like that. Because like you say, that's true freedom then, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, brilliant. Thank you ever so much for all your time. And if people listening want to go and find out more about the Queer Box or Branding by G, or just generally want to connect with G, I'll make sure that I put all the links and stuff in the show notes if you would listen to this on iTunes, or if you're watching it in YouTube, or you're watching in the Freedom Project group. We'll put everything in there. But I really appreciate your time. It's been great to connect with you recently, and I've loved to have you on this show. So thanks, G.
Thanks, Anna. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Hey, thank you for listening. Hope you had a blast. Here to elevate your life. It's the Freedom Podcast. Love, money, mind. Love, money, mind. Wanna see you all win. Wanna see you all shine. Just make sure that you subscribe. Bringing good vibes. Join the Facebook group. Now it's time to change your life. Hope you come back. Right now is the chance. This is an experience. It's the Freedom Podcast. Hey.